We are about to begin the Veterans History Project interview. My name is Tony Kierna. I am the genealogy coordinator of the Schaumburg Township District Library in Schaumburg, Illinois. I will be interviewing Dwayne Heidtbrink, U.S. Air Force, Cold War veteran, regarding his military service. Today's date is August the 7th, 2019. The interview is being conducted in the Schaumburg Township District Library TV studio. No one else is present in the room. Dwayne, thank you for participating in the Veterans History Project. Thank you for your military service. It is a privilege and an honor to conduct this interview with you.
Oh, thank you.
So let's get started sort of right at the beginning and stuff like that.
Okay.
Give us some background. Where were you born?
I was born in Seward, Nebraska, the hospital there, a small town about 20 miles west of Lincoln.
Okay, and what year were you born?
1945.
Okay. And how about your parents? What were their names?
My father was Frederick Heidtbrink. My mother was Anna Heidtbrink. My father was 42 when I was born. My mother was 30.
Okay. And how about brothers and sisters?
I have one sister, Marilyn. She's 3 years older than I am. And she lives on a farm in Friends, so at least one of us stayed on the farm.
Really? So your background in your parents, everything was related to farming?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay. And how about the schools you went to? What were like the grammar schools, high schools?
Okay, Garland Public Schools. The town that we lived closest to was Garland. That was about a population of about 200.
Okay.
And I started the Garland Public Schools for about 3 years. Then I went to the Zion Lutheran School for the rest of elementary.
Okay.
And then back to Garland High School, where I graduated in 1963.
Okay. When you were in high school, did you participate in a lot of activities?
Oh yeah, yeah. There were so few of us, we had to take on double roles.
Ah.
So
like, what was the population of the school?
Well, about 45, 50.
Wow.
Our class was 11.
Oh my gosh! I didn't
that was
realize.
One of the bigger ones.
I mean, my own background. Not that it's relevant to what we're talking about here, but I mean, I was in a high school class itself. 1 year of the class, it had like 500 students.
Right.
And so when you're saying 45 for the whole school,
yeah,
that's amazing. Did you feel that kind of schooling was beneficial to you, or were you hoping that it would be a bigger school, or obviously you couldn't go to a bigger school because it was local to you?
Right. As the years went by, I realized that it would have been better if I had gone to a larger school. I'd have had more of exposure to different subjects and different teachers.
Yeah.
But everything was pretty intensive. I mean, if you applied yourself, the teachers would help you. And
okay.
So it was a balance, I think.
Did you have a favorite teacher?
No, I got along with most of them pretty well.
Okay. How about extracurricular activities? What were the things that you were involved in that everybody was doing double duty on?
Well, as I said, I had to be both a geek and a jock. So I played basketball and baseball, and we had like chorus. We had plays. I was absolutely dreadful actor.
Okay.
But it was a school play.
Is the town that you grew up in, is that anywhere near Omaha? What's the biggest town near you guys?
Well, Lincoln would be the largest
Lincoln,
town.
okay.
It was further to the north than Seward. So.
Now, with your parents in that, did your parents have brothers and sisters in the area that were also like in the farming community?
Yes, there was my Uncle Henry and my Aunt Hattie, and then they lived within a mile of us.
Okay.
And then there were folks like the Sundermans on my father's side, and my mother had several brothers.
Now, was the farm that you guys had, did that go back in time a good deal to some other family member who ultimately settled out there?
Well, my grandfathers both were immigrants from Germany.
Okay.
One came over in 1879, the other in about 1892. So that dated from there. I'm not sure who the owners were before that.
Is it big acreage that you guys had?
No, not, about 160 acres.
Oh, okay.
It was like an all-purpose farm.
Okay. So now that your high school was done, what did you plan on, or were you able to actually go to college at that point?
Yeah, I went to the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and I graduated there in January of 1968.
Oh, okay. And what was your specialty? What was your major?
Well, I started out as a history major, and then after a year I changed it to broadcast journalism. And I think, well, one of the minors I had was the Russian language, and then English and so forth. So it was,
And what was your inclination, why you were leaning even towards Russian as a minor?
I'm not really sure. I saw there was some information about Russia in one of the, I think it was a geography textbooks, and it just, with the Cyrillic alphabet, it just looked kind of interesting to
Okay.
me. So when I had a chance, I applied for it.
That's interesting. Did the school offer all kinds of languages at that level?
Sure, yeah. Spanish, Italian,
Okay.
German,
Okay.
The whole.
So now you graduated from
Yeah.
college with the degree that you had in the broadcast area and stuff like
Yeah.
that, which is interesting because that was, I guess, the days obviously before the internet, and
Oh,
so
sure.
everything was, hardwired and
Right.
and studio work. Did you ever get the chance to move into a broadcast studio job role?
I was an intern at an Omaha TV station for one summer,
Oh, okay.
summer of '66, when I was a junior.
And what did they have you doing as an intern?
Basically background production work. We would give cues to the performers, and
Wow.
one time my arm was.
What was the
in a
kind of
commercial.
shows that you were involved in?
It was basically putting together commercials for the soaps and for other programs,
Okay.
news programs.
Okay,
Yeah.
wow. Now, were you there long enough to start moving up the ranks, or
No, I was just at the
Just the
station
intern?
for the one summer.
so what were your plans after the internship was over? What were you going to be doing then?
Well, at that point I was just looking ahead only so far as graduating, and I had kind of messed up my schedule when I changed majors, so I ended up going 4.5 years instead of 4.
Okay.
And then I was going to be looking for work somewhere in the industry, but I decided to get the military obligation out of the way first.
Okay,
And that-
because the draft was on at that time. And
Yeah.
were you thinking that you were going to be drafted into the Army at that point?
No, not really. There were, I mean, it was a possibility, but this was before the draft lottery.
Ah,
So
okay.
it would be just a case of how many people from the county actually were available.
So at that point, were you now looking to see what service branch you were going to
Yeah.
join?
Yeah.
And what was your process to evaluate that?
Well, first of all, I tried to join the Air Force and go into the officer candidate school or whatever, but I was rejected for that because I can't hear in one ear.
Oh.
Later on, I went into the Air Force, enlisted, and they didn't care.
They didn't seem to have a problem with that, huh? Only at the officer level.
Yeah, so,
Well, that sounds to me like the officers could turn a deaf ear to whoever they were in charge of and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So at this point now, were you literally ready to make the decision to actually enlist in the Air Force?
yeah.
Okay. And where did you do that? Was it in Lincoln?
No, it was in Omaha. Their nearest, excuse me, their nearest,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I guess, entry point or whatever. So I went there early on a Thursday in April, and I was there all day, and really didn't do anything except take the oath.
Okay. And what year was that you enlisted?
That was April 1968.
Okay, okay. And obviously, again, that was at the time, I know the Vietnam War was going
Yeah.
on and stuff like that. So now you enlist. What did your parents think? What did your whole family think of you enlisting?
They were in favor of it. My dad said it was a good idea. My mother she was okay with it.
Did you have any family background of other men or women serving in the military?
Yeah, I mentioned my Uncle Henry. He had been in the Army during World War I, although he wasn't actually shipped overseas. but he he served for a couple of years, I believe.
Okay.
And he was, I know in 1918 he was still in the service.
Okay. So now that you enlisted, what was the next set of things that happened in terms of your beginning of training and that? Where did they wind up sending you?
Well, we went to basic training in San Antonio, Lackland Air Force Base, and that was it was supposed to be a 6-week course. It turned out to be a little longer for me because they considered me to be overweight for that, even for the enlisted. So I had to go into what they call the PC flight.
Wow, I did not even know that that was in existence at that time.
And so we had lots of exercise, running, and drills aside from the usual stuff.
And did it work for you? Did the weight come down?
They gave us a low carbohydrate diet, so the weight came off pretty fast.
Wow, I had no idea that the military back in the 60s was that concerned about the aspects of your health and your ability to serve.
Right, yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So now that you were there for the 6-week period or a little longer, what was the process there that was evolving? Like, what was going to happen to you next after this?
Well, didn't really know until late in the PC flight time, and they gave everybody some tests, aptitude tests, and I tested well in the language, and then they said basically pick a language, and so I said Russian, and that's how I ended up there. Wow. But until we were actually told, I didn't know where I was going.
Was the advanced training that you were going into, was that also at Lackland, or was that at another place?
No, that would be at Syracuse, New York.
Okay.
That was an intensive Russian.
And did you go like with a group of Air Force enlistees at that time who chose Russian also to go to Syracuse?
Yeah, there was I think 10 or 12 of us to begin with, and
it was all in Russian, or did they have other enlistees who chose other languages?
There were others who chose other languages. Yeah, as I recall, I don't think there were any other languages taught at Syracuse, but there were other places around the country. They did have more of a wide curricula, so to say. I think the largest one was in Monterey, California.
Okay.
And they had, Italian, German, and Vietnamese and Chinese, I think.
Okay.
So that was like a much bigger facility.
Wow. I mean, I guess I don't realize it until I hear you even talk about it, how you could literally pick any language that's in the world, and we, through the Air Force, would have to have people knowledgeable about that language in order to work through security and getting the messages through and interpreting those messages. So now, how long were you at Syracuse? And this was at the actual university, right?
Yeah, it was at the university, but it wasn't really part of the university.
Okay.
I mean, you couldn't transfer credits or anything like that.
Okay.
But it was in kind of an isolated part of the campus. It was called Skytop. There were a lot of hills. And
so was it only Air Force people?
Yeah, there was only Air Force people. And we were more or less a little world of our own. We interacted somewhat with the students, but for the most part, we were kept sequestered, shall we say.
And you had your own like dorm facilities?
Yes.
Okay.
Dorms.
And how long were you there at Syracuse?
That was about 9 months until May of 1969.
Okay. Yeah. Was that like a long period because it was Russian, or did each language have its own?
Yeah, each language had a lengthy, intensive training course.
Okay.
Our teachers were not university, well, they were like auxiliaries, I guess. Several of my teachers were Russian immigrants who had escaped the Tsar somehow, and they were very good. They weren't. Some of them weren't quite up with the American idiom yet. But they were very competent.
You know, that's what I think I heard among a lot of languages. It's always the idioms that can trip people up because it's how we use weird combinations of words. And I assume Russian would have its own version of it.
Yeah.
So now that you were coming near the end of that phase of training, was there more training afterward to follow?
Yes. were sent to San Angelo, Texas, Goodfellow Air Force Base there for another, about a 3.5 month course, and this was, if Syracuse had been general language, the course at Goodfellow was more the technical, the actual things we would be hearing.
Okay.
We had tapes from Berlin and other places that we had to study.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I mean, that's a good way in a real life setting
Yes.
to be exposed before you're actually on duty doing that.
Right.
Well, I mean, what kind of examples were they using? Were they using just day-to-day conversations that you would have to quickly interpret?
Sometimes, but most of it was military technical, ground-to-air transmissions, the things that we would actually be hearing when we went overseas.
Okay. Wow. Were you graded on that?
Yeah. It was, in that respect, it was like a college course, I guess.
Did you at this point have any choice in selecting a location where you were going to go to?
No, not really. They happened to need people in Berlin at that time, so that's where I ended up. There were lots of other places I could have gone. I could have gone to an airborne unit that conducted surveillance, off the borders of Russia, or there was a big base in Turkey, which everyone tried to avoid.
And why would they? I remember we talked about that a little bit earlier. Why did they want to avoid that?
Well, for one thing, if you looked at a Turkish woman, you could get your heart cut out.
Oh, jeez.
And it was a very strict society, and you didn't get much of a chance to blow off steam. So what I'm told, I never had to go there.
Okay. Now let's say you did get sent to Berlin. Were you only one interpreter sent, or was there a group of you from the Air Force
again,
sent?
it was a group, probably 8 or 10 by this time, and we all ended up at Berlin.
So in other words, you were going to replace 8 or 10 people who were coming out of service and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of new people all at the same time to go into that role.
Yeah.
When you went to Berlin, was it if I remember right, Berlin was a divided city at that point, East and West Berlin, but Berlin was actually in East Germany, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct,
So were you on an air base, a U.S. Air Force base?
No, well, we were at Tempelhof Airport, which part of it was dedicated to the Air Force. Part of it was the civilian airport, and that's where we were actually. That's where our barracks were in the old. Like apartments.
What was the actual I don't know, in Air Force terminology or jargon, what unit were you in?
Well, it was the 69 12th Security Squadron. The designation, what we did was a 203, an intercept operator.
Okay.
And that didn't change in all the time.
So were you as a interpreter at that point, or translator at that point, everybody had headsets on and you guys were listening to just random things out there that were Russian?
Not random. We were listening for transmissions between Russian aircraft and their controlling bases. And we were using reel-to-reel tape recorders. I mean, there was no digital in those days, of course, so you had to actually play things along. And it was just strange because it was the same machines that I had been using in college in broadcast journalism.
So were you given an assignment that this is the one conversation that you're going to listen to from beginning to end? And how did you switch between other conversations?
Yeah, you didn't know when you went to the listening post. We never knew what was going to come up, and it was just whatever happened to be going, and then the supervisor would say, get on this, and if it was a long exercise, we could be there for an hour or two.
And were you translating, literally real time? Were you, as you were hearing the words come in, you were translating it and somebody was already able to interpret the English part of that?
Not translating. We were we're taking everything down in Russian, writing everything in Russian, and then those papers were, I believe there were some administrators who kind of summarized all the work, and then some of that work product was then sent to Washington.
Okay.
If they felt it was interesting, and it's occasionally one of the tapes would also be sent.
When you were on duty for that, how long were the hours? Was it 12 hours? Was it 8 hours?
It was 8 hours. There were 3 8-hour shifts.
Okay.
And you were on a schedule where you worked 4 days day shift, like 8 to 4, and then 4 days night shift, 4 to 12, and then 4 days on a graveyard shift from midnight to 8 a.m. And then you got 4 days off.
And that just sort of rotated routinely like that and stuff like that. Wow, I mean, it seems to me like the intensity of what you have to do would be very, very tiring and stuff, to just listen and get the words down and everything like that.
Yeah, it was, it could get pretty intense.
Did you find that as you were getting more and more used to doing it, it became easier?
Yeah, as you became more proficient at it, and you knew what the people wanted. They wanted everything in a compact form. They didn't. You could write notes on your intercept sheets and tell what was going on, but basically they just wanted the dialogue for any given situation.
Okay. Did you get feedback on any unique situations that really turned out to be incredibly important that you were involved in translations?
Yeah, once in a while the Russians would send up what looked like not an invading force, but a bombing force toward the West German border.
Wow.
And of course by then that was west of us. And they would fly toward the border with huge numbers of aircraft, and then at the last minute they would break off. And but we knew pretty sure they weren't going in. But
what was your gut feeling that made you think it wasn't going to be real and they were like testing us?
Because they did it every once in a while, every month or so. The first time we did it, it was like, my God, what's happening here? But then they said, no, don't worry about it.
Okay, so some officer there was able to assure you that if this was your first time sensing this, you probably yourself were in a state of panic or something like that. So did this happen like on just a recurring basis, routinely?
Yeah, I would say once every 1 or 2 months. And everything else was, most of everything else was just training. And they had certain missions they had to, they would go to bombing ranges and so forth, and practice missile lock-ons and lock-offs. And we got to know some of some of my voices by their particular.
Now these would be Russian pilots?
Yeah. One of them we called Gabby Hayes because.
And why is that?
Like Gabby.
Really?
Yeah.
He had, but as he speak in Russian, he sounded like Gabby Hayes, who was an American, obviously.
Yeah.
Wow. How about any fun things? Did you ever have any light moments where that you got a sense that the Russians were maybe pulling your leg a little bit more or something like that?
Maybe not, but the most boring thing was listening to helicopter training, because they would go from point A to point B and then turn, and then point to point C and then turn, and that's you were kind of just rolling your eyes and writing it down in advance because you knew what was coming.
Okay.
But then there were some classic tapes that we listened to of things that had happened, and one of them it looked like the plane was going to crash, and evidently he pulled out at the last minute, and another of the other pilots said he's got angels riding on his shoulder today.
Wow. I mean, I guess then, like you're saying, if you could become familiar with those same voices over and over as you were there for as long as you were. By the way, how long were you in East Berlin?
I was there until August of 1970.
Or in Berlin, I should say, not.
Just about 2 years.
Okay. And all that time was spent doing the translation, real
Yeah,
time and stuff?
yeah.
Was that getting near the end of your service time?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And what did you guys do for fun or enjoyment when you were in Berlin?
Went out on the town, you know. The main drag was the Kurfürstendamm or the Kudamm, and there were thousands of, it seemed like, bars and so forth. And there were other places, you know, smaller.
Okay, I have to ask this kind of question because obviously you're a specialist in Russian language. Were you ever, when you were going out having fun, being the kind of person who happened to be sitting nearby where a Russian conversation was going on and you sort of knew everything what was happening?
You know, I never had that happen. There weren't that many, as far as I know, there weren't that many Russian civilians there. But there were certain rules that we had to follow. We were absolutely forbidden to go into the East or in any way, shape, or form. And there are two subway systems in Berlin at that time. I'm not sure what's there now. But the U-Bahn was stayed in the west, so you could ride that anywhere. But the S-Bahn went through West Germany, so you were forbidden.
I mean, is it possible you could have actually made a mistake and crossed over into East Berlin unknowingly?
Well, not unknowingly, because the boundaries were such that they moved back and forth on a map. It's kind of like Schaumburg and Hoffman. Are you in Schaumburg? Are you in Hoffman?
Okay.
And in some cases it was like that in Berlin. So the U-Bahn would go over East Berlin territory, but there were no stops.
Okay.
But then there was one particular S-Bahn route that's actually had a stop in East Berlin, but it was in both West Berlin and East Berlin when they had a stop there, and we were forbidden to get off there or to even ride that line. So of course that's what everybody did, and we call that shooting the gap.
Were you anywhere near, I think, what they call the famous term Checkpoint Charlie?
Not for work, but I went there several times just to.
Okay.
It was,
and when you went out on a town, you weren't in uniform, were you?
No.
Okay. And at this point in time, the time that you've been gone from home, how about communication back to your family and stuff? How was that going and taking place?
Mainly by letters. I may have called a few times, but I'm not sure about that at this point, but mostly by letter.
Okay.
Of course, I say no internet, there's no chatting, emails.
So did you get frequent letters from your parents and family and friends?
Yeah, on a regular basis, I would say, yeah.
Okay. During your term that was there any, the best way to describe it is, news crisis that came up and everything was in a real panic mode or something? Not necessarily on what you were translating, but just all of a sudden the political climate, everything was in a crisis mode in Berlin.
The thing that that sticks with me is when the Apollo 13 incident was going on, and it was like being out on the street, and it was as if you were in an American city. The Berliners were very concerned about what was happening. They had TV set up, and hoping that they'd get home.
So again, it just shows worldwide there was an interest in our astronaut program and the ships that we were sending up in space and everything like that. Well, that's interesting. So how frequently did you get letters from home? Weekly, monthly?
I would say every couple of weeks, something like that.
Did you get anything special sent to you that you always wanted or needed that the Air Force wasn't supplying to you?
No, not really.
No?
I can recall.
And so at this point now, you're coming near the end of your complete 4-year enlistment with the Air Force?
Right. That ended up being cut short. What happened was that my parents were both of German extraction from the northern Germany, went around the Bremerhaven area. And so they came to visit me in October of 1970. And we actually visited various distant relatives in Germany. Of course, to get out of Barrington, to get out of Berlin, you had to use the Russian railway system. He actually had to get a permit from the Russian government to ride the railroad.
To have your parents come in?
Yeah.
I guess I could see that being, for a civilian,
Yeah.
a rather testy way for them to visit you
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was, I remember it was a night train and a very slow train.
Were you like the only enlistee who had their parents come over? Or were there others?
As far as I know, I was the only one, but I'm sure it happened. I mean, out of our group, but probably others did that.
Yeah.
But at any event, unfortunately, while we were transferring from one train to another at a city called Osnabrück, my father suddenly had a stroke and passed away.
Wow.
And,
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So, well, my mother and I, actually we ended up taking a taxi cab all from Osnabrück to Frankfurt because she didn't want to go back on the train. And then eventually we flew out of Frankfurt all the way home.
Okay.
I never went back to Berlin on that occasion.
Okay. So at this point, the end is coming for your
Yeah.
service. I assume your mom went back home,
Yeah.
or whatever,
Yeah.
and everything worked out in terms of with your father and the passing away and,
Yeah.
and all of that.
Yeah, I was home on leave for that, so I was able to do that. And then when I got back to Berlin later in the year, I applied for a hardship discharge because of my mother
Okay.
being getting up in age, and
Yeah.
she was still working, but you know, she
Okay.
wanted a companion and so forth.
Sure.
But it took a long time. I wasn't sure if it would ever come through, but it finally did in August that year,
Okay.
after about 8 months or so.
So at this point now, you were basically getting ready to leave
Yeah.
Berlin,
Yeah.
head back, and where were you heading back to now?
Well, we lived in Lincoln at that time.
But this was, you were completely done with your service at this point, or did you have to finish service yet back home?
No, I guess with the hardship discharge, there was no reserve component as it would be with others. So yeah, in August 1971, I flew back to Andrews Air Base and then was discharged.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So at this point, did you ultimately go back home then?
Yeah, yeah.
And at this stage, what was the future plans for you now? Was it going to be back into the broadcast area? Was
Yeah.
it going to use Russian now that you knew Russian so well?
Yeah. I was trying to look at the stations in Omaha and Lincoln, and actually right after I got back, I worked for a time for the University of Nebraska Public Relations Department. But that only was a temporary job, and so then I started looking around, and eventually I made a trip to Indiana University. Well, actually I went back to Syracuse on one trip, just for old times' sake, and it had really changed by that time. The university had taken over the Skytop arrangement again, so there was no more language school there. And then, as I stopped in Indianapolis, considered going into grad school, but for one reason or another, that didn't happen. So.
Did you have any thoughts whatsoever of staying in the military?
No, they had promoted me to staff sergeant just before the end of my enlistment, and well, I thought about it, but then I figured, well,
Okay.
let's try civilian life for a while.
So now, what was your transition to civilian life? What were your next steps?
It was pretty smooth. When I left Berlin, I was extensively debriefed, and they were very clear that even after I was out, there was to be no traveling to Russia or communist bloc countries as a tourist, and so there was
As a translator, were you under like a higher level of secrecy
well,
or clearance, whatever that
yeah, We had top secret clearances,
Okay.
but that was true all the way through there. There were, in addition to Russian, there were German language operators and Polish.
Okay.
And yeah, everybody had.
And when you left the service, were you told in any way not to talk about what you had done?
Yeah, they were very strict about that.
What did they tell you exactly you can't do?
Well, something like this in a bar or something. But with the end of the Cold War, that kind of went away. But yeah, we were told not to discuss what we did or how we got certain information.
Wow.
Where the antennas were, things like that. So I was pretty mum about it.
I guess. I mean, I can understand that because is there something that they could have done to you if they ever found out you said something?
Well, I was out of the military, but they could have, I suppose the FBI could have paid a visit and could have been in some trouble there.
Wow. So, okay, so now you're back home, and what year was this?
1971.
And what was were you looking for jobs? Were you looking for, what to do next in your life?
Yeah, looking for jobs, and I had a few temporary jobs, and then in 1973, I saw an ad in the Lincoln paper and about an opening in a paper in Lexington, which is like in the middle of the state, much smaller than Lincoln, for the newspaper there, and so I applied and I got that, and that's when I started actually writing for newspapers.
Oh. So would you be considered like, I don't know what the actual term would be, where your name is actually given on articles that you were writing?
No.
Okay.
Everything was anonymous.
Well, what kind of things were you writing about? What were your assignments?
I'm sorry, yeah. Actually, I did some general news and then a lot of sports. It was basically a sports editor position.
Wow.
So,
but did not back into the broadcast side of the house with the interest you had at that point?
That was the first opportunity that I had to really get into journalism. And then I just stayed with it. It seemed to suit me better than.
So it sounds to me like if you're in sports journalism, you probably were hobnobbing with a lot of, professionals, college, sports figures.
Yeah, occasionally, yeah. When I came to the Chicago area, I worked for Barrington Press in Barrington, Illinois.
And when did you come to the Chicago area?
About April 1974.
Oh, so you were only back there in Nebraska for a relatively short period of time.
Right, about 8 months, yeah.
What made you decide the Chicago area?
Well, as I told you in our pre-interview, the love of a good woman.
Well, here's your chance to tell us about what happened. How did
well, it actually involved someone from Berlin. One of my supervisors was married in October of 1973, and she was a guest at the wedding, and so we got together and we hit it off, and
okay.
One thing led to another.
And her name?
Margaret Pirani.
Okay. So how did it evolve after that?
Well, we eventually got married in 1975.
Okay.
And I was still working at Pioneer Press at that time.
Okay.
And she was working downtown, and she thought it was hilarious because she was making more than I was.
Wow.
Well, that was fine.
Was that how it was in the newspaper business? Very little pay?
Yeah, it was. Well, it still is. It's not a lucrative position. You don't really go into it for the money.
Did you get to go on any unique, memorable trips related to doing your newspaper work?
No. Well, a lot of covering sporting events.
Okay.
And
what's the biggest sporting event you covered?
Occasionally we do features with the Chicago Bears and White Sox, but and Cubs. But
so the professional teams in Chicago and stuff like that.
And I remember I went to a DePaul game because a Barrington player had been recruited by Dayton, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
And, So I went to see that game, and it turned out to be his last game because he quit the team afterwards.
Okay. Wow. So where did you wind up when you came to Illinois? Did you come to the northwest suburbs?
At first, we lived in Rogers Park, in the northwest side of Chicago, I guess. And then in September of 1975, we moved to Barrington.
Okay.
Oh, actually, to Hoffman Estates. It was not quite part of Barrington, but that's while I was in Barrington.
Okay.
We moved to Hoffman Estates on Higgins Road. And then in 1977, we bought our house. That's where we've been.
Did you have children?
Yeah, we had 3 children.
Okay. Any of the children get into the newspaper business?
No.
Or the Russian translation business?
No, I said, find something else.
That's experience telling them.
Yeah.
That. So since you've been out here since the 1970s,
Yeah.
did you stay with Pioneer Press the whole time?
Yeah. Toward the end of my time, I was actually assigned to a desk downtown for a couple of years, so
Okay.
that was something new and different.
Did you have any concerns when you came back to the United States after your service, just adjusting back to civilian life?
No, it seemed to go pretty smoothly.
Okay.
I mean, at that time, in most places, returning veterans, I guess in some places were given a hard time, but in Nebraska that wasn't really the case. It's a much more conservative state. I mean, not that they didn't have a few disturbances.
Were you able to take advantage of any of the GI-related bill material in order to go back to school or to advance yourself through that?
I did apply to graduate school, but then jobs came along. So no, I didn't really use the GI Bill. I probably should have, but
Okay. All right. So living out here in the Hoffman Estates area and stuff like that, you've been here ever since, obviously, because
Yeah.
we're here now talking, and it's the year 2019.
yeah.
So why did you, or how did you wind up getting to Hoffman Estates? What was the draw for Hoffman?
Well, as I say, I went to work in Barrington. This was less than 10 miles from Barrington, so I just we stayed in an apartment first of all, and then bought a house, also in Hoffman Estates.
Okay.
So it was just a location, really.
Okay. And just it was just that was when everything was growing out here,
Yeah.
and buildings were taking
Yeah.
place and everything like that. How about from going back to your service time? Did you make any real strong friendships with the people that you were working with in Berlin?
Yeah, sure. As I said, one of my supervisors, I went to his wedding and met my wife, and there were 1 or 2 others that we.
Are you still considered like friends with them now? Are you in touch with them?
No, not really. We've kind of drifted apart now.
Okay. Okay. Have you participated in any of like the Veterans of Foreign Wars or American Legion?
I joined the American Legion a few years ago. Yeah.
Okay. What do you think of that?
I haven't been very active, I'm afraid.
Okay.
But it seems to be a good organization.
Okay.
I remember back in my high school days, I remember playing American Legion baseball, so it was kind of a trip or a link to the past.
I know from my own brother-in-law, which I interviewed and stuff like that. Have there been any with the military unit that you were part of? Have they had like reunions on any kind of recurring basis that you're aware of?
No, I don't believe so. The 69 12th was disbanded shortly after I left. I think they just had like an organization reshuffle and centralized it more. But yeah, I mean, a few of the guys I was with talked about, having a reunion here and now, but
Okay.
again, didn't happen.
Yeah, I can understand that. We're going to probably start entering a phase of what the interview is now, which the Library of Congress refers to as reflections, sort of just generalized questions, about your feelings and thoughts about things in general. How do you think your military service life affected your life?
In a positive way, I think. I like the camaraderie and I guess the sense of teamwork. And you had to, it gave me a little more discipline than I had had before.
Okay.
Learning to rely on others and have others rely on you was a good thing.
Okay. And do you feel good that you did select the Russian as a major component of your skill set?
Yeah, it was a. I remember it fondly, I guess you could say. I know a lot of people.
This is sort of like a forward kind of question. You functioned as a translator before all of the electronics and software and everything like that. What do you think the Air Force even does today? Do you have any idea or insights?
Actually, I think I got the best idea of what's happening now is just by watching the movie Snowden. And I thought, that's what they're doing now. There's so much electronics and as they say, it's now centralized.
Yeah.
So it's a much different game.
I can imagine for that. What have been some life lessons that you've learned from being in the military?
Well, I guess you have to trust other people. You have to interact with people of different races and religions and backgrounds. I always felt the military was very advanced in terms of relations between people. I maybe was naive, but in Berlin everybody got along, it seemed. I mean, not everybody, but there were there was no great friction among different groups.
Do you think that might have been because too the job that you were doing was so critical that as working with colleagues you couldn't afford to be having problems?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, sure.
Okay, all right. How about on the military side itself here? Being when you were in the Cold War, doing Russian translations in Berlin, and being aware of all of that aspect of military war and whatever was going on at that time, although it being the Cold War, how has that impacted your life? What do you think in general about the military and about wars today and what's going on?
Well, I say just from a personal standpoint, I found the military experience to be positive, but in terms of the overall view of what we're attempting to accomplish, and I think probably overextended. I wouldn't put it this way. I wouldn't particularly care to be involved with it now because it's so uncertain. That was one thing about the Cold War. You knew where you stood. It was us and it was them.
Right.
And you could react. But now, with all the terrorism and different countries taking pot shots at the U.S. from time to time, it's a much different situation. And I admire the guys who are in it now.
I know. I mean, like you're saying, then when you were in, it was Russia versus us and the Cold War and how they were having the walls built and everything, wouldn't let citizens go here, go there, and everything like that. So I could see that. You're right. It was like a clear cut. They're our enemy. We are the good guys here, and stuff like that. So, what kind of, because you served in the military, what kind of messages would you like to leave for future generations regarding the military or your part you played in the military as it would affect them?
Well, never volunteer. No, try to find a place where you can contribute.
But you did, in essence, when you enlisted, you sort of did that.
Try to find a place where you can contribute. Try to pull your own weight in whatever situation you find yourself in. Probably be a little more outgoing than I was. I had a tendency to keep to myself, even in the
Really?
military.
Now, do you think that was just naturally you, or
No,
was
that
it the
was-
work
yeah,
that you were doing that required
that's
you?
me, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting for that. We're going to switch over to what we now call the conclusion phase of the interview.
Okay.
So there's a few more questions and, you know, odds and ends and stuff like that, looking for your opinion in that. I've been asking a lot of questions. We've been building on some of your life and your military service and that. Is there anything that I may not have asked that you'd like to talk about or share?
Well, I mentioned that I was rejected by the officer candidate school and then ended up as an enlisted man. And another part of that was that I can't hear out of my right ear. So again, they weren't shy about taking me anyway. So and that's kind of followed me. There were certain things I couldn't do, you know, involving interactive communications, because you had to have two headsets, and you're supposed to be able to listen to both. I could only listen in one, so that kind of hampered me a little bit.
So how were you able to adjust to that?
Well,
or was it just that you worked with the one ear that was
just,
funcking and stuff like that?
I just had to adapt to it.
Okay.
And that's been since I think it was 1948 when I was 3 years old. I had an ear infection and it just wiped it out.
That's amazing. From what we've been talking about here, is there anything you would like future generations to just remember specifically about your own story, what we've shared here?
Probably not so much for myself alone, but I think a lot of the people today don't really have much of an understanding what the Cold War was. I was reminded of that with PBS recently had a series of going to the moon. It's the 50th anniversary, and you know, at that time, at least much of the population was completely in favor and behind it. But now there seems to be more of a fractionated opinion about. As I say, when there was a clear-cut opponent, people had a tendency to rally around it, and now it's a little more diffused.
Okay, that's a good observation. Is there anything else that we can talk about that we haven't covered? Anything else you'd like to add?
Can't think of anything right now. No.
Okay. What would be, and this would be literally probably the final question that we can go through. What would you hope that people would know more about veterans in general, and how maybe the general population should interact or react with veterans?
Well, I think this whole business of sponsoring veterans at like at sporting events, you single out one person and give them the adulation and so forth, and then everything else kind of gets forgotten. I think more interaction with services. I think it's just there's almost an us and them between civilian and military now, more than even there was in my day. But you know, people will they seem to be appreciative of the efforts, but they don't really take the time to interact, let's say. Some people do, of course, but in general, universal military service might not be a bad idea. You wouldn't need that many people, but I think you could make it more attractive, because I think it is a good experience in general. But it just seems that that's not something a lot of people ever consider doing.
Okay. This is sort of, I should have asked this earlier on, because I like to ask all the veterans that I interview. though you were in the Cold War in Berlin, did you have any good luck charms that you brought with?
No, not really.
Okay, not really. And another sort of a question, what was it that made you get interested in this interview process that we're doing? What was the thing that you said, oh wow, that sounds like a good idea?
Well, my wife, I mentioned that the program is going on, and she works here part-time at the library. And yeah, I thought it would be kind of an interesting thing to do.
Okay.
Get your observations.
Yeah, and again, it is going to go to the Library of Congress, so your service information and all that will be there for everyone in the future to go over and something like that. Is there anything else we need to add or we need to cover?
I can't think of anything right now.
Okay, so we're just going to go into the conclusion phase at this point then. So this does conclude our interview of Dwayne Heidtbrink, U.S. Air Force, Cold War veteran for the Veterans History Project. Thank you, Dwayne, for your participation in the Veterans History Project. It means a lot to us as individuals and to the nation as a whole that your story of your military service will live on for all future generations to reflect upon. Thank you so much for sharing with us your story of your military service. Thank you so much for your military service. It has been an honor and a privilege to have interviewed you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.